I want to talk about inflation. Yeah, I know it's not Andrew Tate or Jordan Peepee Man, but that doesn't mean it's a topic that's any less on the mind of the average American.
Everything is like $3 or $4 more than originally priced.
Some days I just don't eat because I know that the next day or the next paycheck, I can eat then.
It's not just food, it's everything.
Huge burden for most families, now paying nearly $450 more a month just for the basics than they were a year ago.
And I also want to talk about the power of information, imagination, and donuts in the capitalist world. What I don't aspire to do at the end of this Adderall-enabled diatribe is solve inflation or even delve into all of its causes that contribute to the worst examples of it, because I'm 25 and what the fuck do I look like doing that? This will not be a hardcore academic persuasive video essay. I am not here to convince Connor from VTech that 2 semesters of econ is not an excuse to be an asshole. Most, if not all of my beliefs are left-leaning or leftist in some capacity, and that's a perspective that I'm going to be speaking with and for. But I'm not unreasonable nor a salesman. I look forward to the conversation that I think this video, or I guess I hope this video, will spark down below. But if I try to sell you on anything, it'll be a framing. Just a different way of looking at things. Okay, enough edging. That's Tayo. This Color Mind. And why does everything cost money?
And now, sports. Funded by the small loan of $1 million that Donald Trump got from his parents and the apartheid emerald mine that Elon Musk got his fortune from. Isn't it funny how these billionaires make it seem like they're self-made, but in reality, they got their wealth from their parents or by exploiting other workers? But hey, that's just a theory. A Think Peace Tribe game theory. But anyways, enough with the socialist thought. Back to sports.
I keep my head above water, grammar we end up on it, stay in apartments I partly paid off, a bouncing deposits and a pension for applying paint to the prettiest apartment of vapid passionate scenes. All I know is the rent too high, the gas too high, the sun too hot, the news too tight, and it don't seem right when the Arizona price get hiked. Like the 99 I'm off in this aluminum spine, inflation of crime. Inflation of crime. Inflation. Hey, Color Dime Tie here, and
Can I ask you kind of a weird question?
what the heck is inflation? Inflation, much like Cyndi Lauper and anti-Semitism, seems to come around time after time.
Hitler also.
According to a hazy 3 a.m. Google search, it's best described as a bubbling regret, a stench that arrives at your doorstep like a ransom letter, a silent thief hiding thick in darkness. Fuck you, I love this bit. In a more straightforward way, inflation is the phenomenon of goods and services increasing gradually in price over time. Now, a little bit of inflation is normal, like the way we like to get a little thicker in the winter. But a lot of inflation can topple economies and render complex state hierarchies irrelevant in a matter of days. But how? How is that possible? How can Arizona be 99 cents for decades and then one day, boom, a 30% price increase and the tea just ain't as sweet anymore? To understand the process by which inflation affects all of us, let's look at 2 common types of inflation, what they mean, how they occur, and then talk about a secret, much more ominous third thing, type of inflation, that is. Demand pull inflation is when there is more demand for a good or service than there is supply. Like this graph says. I don't know, I'm not a virgin. As firms produce more, they employ more workers, creating a rise in employment. This increased demand for workers puts upward pressure on wages, leading to wage push inflation. Higher wages increase the disposable income of workers, leading to a rise. It's like if everybody really wanted to play basketball that Saturday at the rec center, but there were only a few basketball courts. Because there aren't enough courts for everybody who wants to play basketball, people might start offering to pay money to use the courts. As a result, the price of using the basketball court or the cost of borrowing a basketball court would predictably go up. Perhaps it starts with somebody slipping somebody a 5, then someone else says, hey, I'll give you a 10, and then maybe it happens that Dijon passes over and he has a 20 on him, and all of a sudden you guys are next on the court. Essentially, as the economy opens up, more individuals want to spend money, but businesses aren't able to meet the demand to take that money as quickly as Karen from Arlington County would like. And well, if consumers are now willing to pay higher prices for my work, who am I to say no to the market? Is the thinking of most businesses. And then, bada bing, bada boom, $200 Air Force Ones when they used to be $90 before every Becky, Bonnie, and Billy decided to fuck up the one white thing that I love, besides Noah Samson. And this here is capitalism's greatest magic trick. Space getting more expensive simply because more people want it. Creating value out of thin air. I wonder what happens when the price of air goes up. Cost push inflation is a type of inflation that occurs when the production cost of a good or of a service increases, leading to higher prices for consumers. There's a bunch of different reasons why this can happen, right? But the most broad example you probably remember about in your microeconomics class or like AP Econ back in high school is that when input costs go up, right? When cost of raw materials, labor, or the stuff it takes to make the stuff goes up, companies tend to push that cost down to the consumer by increasing prices for their product. We can also look at government policies. Changes in regulations or statutes can increase production cost and lead to cost push inflation because obviously if there are stricter regulations or there is a change in the way that a business or vendor is allowed to do their business. I think a lot about when the government gets involved in like offshoring or the type of meat that like fishermen are allowed to hunt. Those type of things end up increasing the price of the goods and services that they inevitably provide to the end consumer. Interest rates are also a big reason why. I mean, you know the saying like with the Fed, when the Fed goes high, so do weed, or something like that. A third reason for cost push inflation that I do want to bring up is monopoly power. Now, a monopoly is this. Here's the definition of a monopoly. I don't feel like looking it up right now, but it's when you own all the things or you own enough of the resource pie for it to be basically like you are the big king, big daddy of this economic system or economy. So if a company has a monopoly on a particular product or service, that allows it to raise its prices without losing any market share. Think about the fact that how much an iPhone 4 cost compared to how much an iPhone 14 cost. Cost push inflation is different than demand pull inflation, which occurs, like we said before, when there's a strong desire or demand for goods and services, and that increased consumer desire leads to higher competition, which is why the price goes up. Cost push, on the other hand, is born out of a more immediate scarcity, if that makes sense, a disruption at the source. Cost push inflation can have negative effects on the economy as it leads to reduced purchasing power and an overall decrease in a nation's economic activity. Governments and central banks try to use monetary and fiscal policies to mitigate these effects, but sometimes, more than sometimes, depending on who you ask, shit goes sideways. When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, the government adopted a currency that was valued at about $1.25. The path to hyperinflation, similar to the rise of West Coast hip-hop, began in the early 1990s when President Robert Mugabe initiated a series of land redistribution programs that took land from the country's white farmers and gave it back to the ethnically black Zimbabweans. Now, you see, at the time, there was a bunch of fertile land in Zimbabwe, and it was owned by this small group of white farmers, while the majority of the population itself was made up of these black Zimbabweans who had limited access to land, even though a lot of them were farmers. Funny how things always seem to work out that way. To address this imbalance, the Mugabe government began a program of land expropriation, or redistribution, which involved seizing land from white farmers and giving it back to black farmers. He did a land back. But while the land distribution program had the potential to address the issue of land ownership, it also had negative consequences on the economy. The program disrupted the agricultural production, as many of the white farmers who had very suddenly been forced to leave their land were experienced and skilled, more so than the farmers who hadn't really had access to that type of land before. In other words, they were unfortunately quite good at their jobs. Meanwhile, the dirt poor new black citizens coming in to replace them were just that, new and dirt poor with no real infrastructure to succeed in. So, while a good idea in principle, the sudden removal of an entrenched and experienced farmer class severely damaged the country's capacity for food production, dropping the supply far below demand and raising prices as a result. Cost push inflation. You go, girl. There's a really good video by Polymatter called Zimbabwe's Currency Crisis. If you would like to know more, I thought it was super fascinating, and it's where I'm pulling most of this analysis from.
It's hard to know exactly how bad it got, as the government stopped reporting numbers after 100,000% inflation, when a loaf of bread cost 30 billion Zimbabwean dollars. Employees stopped going to work when their annual salary wouldn't even pay for their bus ride home.
Sin and a shame. Sin and a shame. Economic missteps by the government can create shortages and occupy people with workarounds rather than being able to use that time to be more productive. Though this harms the economy, it doesn't necessarily undermine the value of the currency, or else the dollar would be worth shit by now. But it does harm confidence in that currency in the future. In Zimbabwe, neither the issuance of banknotes of higher denominations, sometimes going all the way up into the billions, nor proclamations of new currency regimes led holders of the currency to expect that this new money would be any more stable than the old. Thus, one reason why the Zimbabwean currency continued to lose value at one point was simply because so many people expected it to. AKA, eventually people started to expect high inflation, which puts it into hyperdrive, and then,
And then what's this new quote that you want? What else do you want? Okay. Oh, right. This is such a good intro. Oh my God. You feel it too, don't you? The ragged breath on the nape of your neck. A swift flash in the corner of your eye whenever you enter a room. The sudden need to comfort your wallet every time you pass a Whole Foods. There's something sus going on in the economy. Glenn Kelman, CEO of Redfin. 1 of 15. It has been hard to convey through anecdotes or data how bizarre the U.S. housing market has become. For example, a Bethesda, Maryland homebuyer working with @Redfin included in her written offer a pledge to name her firstborn child after the seller. She lost. 5 of 15. In 2020, new construction permits were down 13% in DC and New York, 40% in LA, 48% in Chicago, 50% in Seattle, 79% in San Francisco. Permits were up 25% in Miami, 56% in Vegas, 96% in Greenville, 122% in Detroit, and 246% in Knoxville. Lumber prices are up 300%. Lumber prices are up 300%.
Listen, inflation is higher than it's been in 30 years. Uber's at $30 while gas starting to look like a Nigerian honor student's off semester, and consumer faith that any of this will turn over anytime soon is quickly approaching between clean and slim. Meanwhile, according to NPR, unemployment is near record lows, people are traveling a ton, restaurants are packed, business spending is up, and retail spending is up. So why the fuck does it feel like the world is burning when, by all accounts, it's just a little warm, if unseasonably for the winter? Well, it's complicated. I'm sure right now you've been yelling at the screen your particular reason for why inflation is currently surging through the country, including, but of course not limited to, COVID-19, Congress, crypto, Trump CARES Act 1, Trump CARES Act 2, Legend of Jafar, poor people who overspent on their stimmy checks, rich people who shifted to buying more goods rather than services and also finesse stimmy checks, President Biden's CARE Act 3, how Joey got his groove back, supply chain issues, specifically that one boat that got stuck in that canal last year, Fed/monetary policy, home shortages, corporate profit seeking, and Obama somehow. And you'd be right, whatever you said. Also, you smell good. Needless to say, there are a bunch of factors causing inflation in the United States right now. Strong economic growth can lead to higher demand for goods and services, which can push up prices. That's demand pull inflation. The Federal Reserve, which the mommy bank in the sky, sets monetary policy, which can influence the supply of money and credit in the economy. So if the Fed increases the money supply or alternatively lowers interest rates, that can stimulate economic growth and potentially lead to higher inflation. But let's put a pin on that for now. I want to talk about inflation, like its concept, and government spending in a little bit. And then, of course, there's also global factors. Inflation in the US can be influenced by changes in commodity prices overseas or exchange rates in general. Also, supply lines or international relations suddenly going sour. There are even recession rooters. Sad, a lot of people cheering for recession because they feel like they can get ahead if there is one, or that they already think we're in a recession. So, fuck it, c'est la vie. It's giving trauma response. Yeah. So not surprisingly, but sort of counterintuitively, the expectation of future inflation can also play a role in current inflation. If people expect prices to rise in the future, they're kind of okay with paying a subtly higher price now, which ends up creating a vicious cycle. Because how you feel feeds into how all y'all feel, and how all y'all feel is a casual way of saying consumer sentiment, which is the king in economics because it factors in to GDP, the sexiest number in economics. The overwhelming nature of all of this creates what Kyla Scanlon coined a Vibecession, when things are economically speaking okay-ish, but in reality, the vibes are off. Jerome Powell, you're scaring the hoes. It really makes you think.
How much a dollar cost?
DMT is a Schedule 1 drug, the DOD is a masturbatory waste of money, and MMT began largely as a description of the Federal Reserve Bank by this white guy in '92, Warren Mosler. He basically asked, what is money, and what if it didn't fuck everybody who didn't have it? Modern monetary theory, also known as MMT, recognizes among other things that the US government and its agents are the only suppliers of which it demands payment for taxes, aka money. The government holds the first bag from which all Sigma grindset males must chase. #2Wolf. And this simple observation could completely change the conversation that we have around government spending, and maybe actually be the solution to economic equality. I don't know. I promise this is sort of cool to think about though, and that's why you're here, isn't it? So I wrote some jokes in between, and then you'll get another Adult Swim style bump. Stay with me. Let's talk about economics for like a little bit. Modern monetary theory is a lot of things. Ironically, one of the things it's not is a theory.
This is a story about money. It has a story about taxes. It has a story about unemployment. It has a story about inflation. And so I figured, this is a full theory of macroeconomics. So let's go through it. And why not start with, what's in the name, like money. So what is the money story from MMT?
Yeah, so it's modern monetary theory because someone on Bill Mitchell's blog started calling it that. And we had the same conversation with each other at the time. Well, it's not really a theory, it's just a set of identities. But the name stuck and it was popularized. It was spreading and it caught on. And so we thought, okay, let's just take the publicity and leave it alone. What's the difference what the name is?
As an economic theory, it emphasizes the role of government in managing the economy. It's based on the idea that as a sovereign nation that issues its own currency, you can't really go broke because you have the power to create more currency to meet its debt obligation, aka to pay your bills. In short, the government doesn't need to rely on taxes or borrowing to fund its spending. It's simply a way to create an obligation between a citizen and their state.
Listen to that again.
The government is paying back its debt with currency that it issues itself. In other words, the federal government doesn't have to worry about earning dollars in order to repay its creditors because it gets to manufacture the currency.
MMT instead pivots and looks to prioritize the importance of full employment and the role of the government in ensuring that there are enough jobs for everybody who wants one. Because the government is the reason why people need jobs in the first place. I mean, you need to pay taxes, remember? And what are you going to pay your taxes in except dollars, NFTs? According to MMT, the government can stimulate demand and create jobs by increasing spending, particularly in infrastructure and other public goods. Basically looking at the country as a whole and saying, well, what do we need to fix? Where is private industry not taking care of its citizens? And we should therefore invest in that and create jobs that way. Am I oversimplifying? Of course. But it's because I plan to cover MMT and applications of it more on the channel in 2023, hopefully turning it into a series of some sort. If you would like me to get to that video sooner rather than later, weeks, possibly months faster, go ahead and leave a like on this video to turn it as black as me. Given what I've said, it's probably unsurprising that MMT has been a controversial theory and has been criticized by some of its potential to lead to higher inflation and government debt. I'm sure I'm getting quite the education now from armchair economists in the comments as we speak. But others have argued that MMT offers a useful framework for understanding the role of government in the economy and can be a helpful guide for policymaking. So what should we take away from all of this?
Can we build affordable housing and fix crumbling infrastructure? Can we expand Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing? Can we tackle our climate crisis? As Congress debates these questions, everyone is back to asking, how will you pay for it? It's the wrong question. In fact, the right questions don't involve money at all. Instead of worrying about where the financing will come from, we should be asking, are these things worth doing? And do we have the real resources, the people, the equipment, the raw materials, and the technology to do them? Will they make society better off?
It's not about what's expensive, it's about what's effective. That needs to be the way that we think about government spending, because there's no basic constraint on government spending in its own currency. And with intention, planning, and good faith, inflation can be managed. All that's ever happening here on the government side is a redistribution of financial assets. That's how government spending works. Their job is to allocate resources across the state. So there isn't a deficit, there's just a surplus somewhere else. And that's what the owner class, the people invested in the hegemony in capitalism, don't want you to see, don't want you to be able to see. The true upside of MMT to me is that it allows us to do the very necessary work that needs to be done by a progressive or leftist or whatever, which is imagine. No, not that one. Imagine a world in which dollars do not control us, but we use this system of fiat value intentionally to maximize the amount of material value that we can give to our families, our friends, our neighbors. In 2008, the US government responded to the financial crisis with a variety of policies and programs aimed at stabilizing the financial system and supporting the broader economy. One of the key programs taken by the government was that of the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, which was authorized by Congress in October 2008. Under TARP, the government purchased troubled assets, aka shit that wasn't making money, from financial institutions such as mortgage-backed securities in order to provide them with liquidity and help them maintain solvency. They bought their shit because, the bank can't go broke. One of the main services the Federal Reserve provides banks and the government as a whole is the ability to settle payments and eligible security transactions by debiting and crediting appropriate accounts at the Reserve Bank. It might not mean a lot to you if you don't deal with numbers or you're not in accounting and finance, but as an accountant, when I hear that, I know that means this is an electronic process. At this point, well over, I believe it's 80 to 90% of the Fed's transactions are done through ACH, so they're done through a sort of direct deposit system. Therefore, there's nobody looking at the actual hard cash on hand when they're making adjustments to people's accounts. On the accounting side, this is just a journal entry, something you put into the computer, basically a change of record that reestablishes your financial relationship with your customer account. You're good now. You don't owe that much money anymore. In fact, in many cases, the support provided by the government did not involve the transfer of physical cash to the financial institution, but rather the transfer of assets via holding the title or through giving loans and allowing those banks to use those funds until as long as they saw fit. Basically, the government took responsibility and then the problem went away. A concept. When you think about it, the government can take ownership of your debt and then say you don't have to pay it if the debt is to them. Yeah, it's their money. So I know all this seems both too simple and too complicated at the same time. However, there's a reason I want to start talking about this. I think a treatment, maybe not an antidote, but close for inflation and for a lot of economic miscommunications, is information. Knowledge that this problem is fixable, is solvable. We have control over the value of the dollar itself, not the other way around. So we should prioritize putting it in the right place, putting it in its most helpful place, in the hands of teachers and daycare providers, coffee shops, private CPAs, soup kitchens that can't afford to keep the lights on for people fleeing darkness themselves. Inflation is caused when people who have excess capital spend it on Rolexes and Teslas, not when people living paycheck to paycheck buy food. And if you're only worried about inflation when working class people in your mind seem to be getting ahead, think about that. Tell me why you feel that way in the comments. We'll work this out together. Degrowth is an idea that critiques the global capitalist system which pursues growth at all costs, causing human exploitation and environmental destruction. The degrowth movement of advocates and researchers advocate for a society that prioritizes social and ecological well-being rather than corporate profits, overproduction, and excess consumption. As an extension of that, degrowth economics is an economic theory that advocates for a reduction in economic growth in order to address the environmental and social issues plaguing us right now, such as climate change and manosphere shorts. The degrowth movement says we need to shift away from a consumer-driven, resource-intensive way of living in favor of a more sustainable, a more equitable model that values the well-being and health of the entire biosphere. We need to do it carefully, we need to do it intentionally, but we need to do it to save the planet, and more importantly, ourselves. Some advantages of degrowth economics include an emphasis on sustainability. Degrowth recognizes the paradox of the capitalist market. It squeezes prices up under the threat of scarcity, yet turns around and promises perpetual returns. Well, are we feast or famine? The planet has finite resources and unlimited economic growth just isn't possible. The line can't go up forever. Instead, degrowth promotes the use of resources in a more sustainable way and seeks to reduce waste and pollution. Unlike capitalism, degrowth looks to solve more economic problems based on community need rather than individual greed. Equity. Degrowth economics aims to address social and economic inequality by redistributing wealth and power and promoting a more equitable access to resources. Proponents of degrowth believe that social changes and an orientation towards sufficiency rather than purely technological changes and improvements in efficiency are the key to solving ecological problems. We need to be focused on how can we be comfortable, not how we can do something quicker, you know? They believe we should start our thinking from there because it has been historically proven that decoupling economic growth from resource use isn't possible. Through a reduction of production and consumption in the global north and liberation from the one-sided Western paradigm of capitalist development, it's more than possible and feasible that a self-determined path to social organization would finally be allowed to develop in the global south, which would be to the betterment of the entirety of humanity because we would have another huge sector of the species actually producing to scale. Finally, I believe one of the biggest advantages of adopting a degrowth economy, or at least a degrowth mindset to economic production, is the improvement in quality of life. Degrowth economics prioritizes well-being and happiness over material consumption, and when its goals are met, it can lead to a higher quality of life not only for individuals, but for communities at large. All citizens would feel like a real part of their government, like they were integral to the government's decision-making process, and would be able to use the democratic process to engage in real societal change. The creation of open and connected localized economies would ensure that communities are not only well-fed, but well-connected to the people that feed them, or cut their grass, or do their taxes. All this with the goal of an economy and a society that sustains the natural basis of life as much as we humans can. However, degrowth is not all daisies and Danny Gonzalez. Reducing economic growth can lead to economic contraction, which can result in job losses and reduced income for some individuals and businesses. Degrowth economics will also face opposition from those who benefit from the current economic system, right? Particularly those who have a vested interest in maintaining high levels of economic growth. And ultimately, shifting to a degrowth model will require significant changes to the way that society functions now, which will be challenging and may face a lot of resistance in the beginning. Overall, degrowth offers an alternative approach to economic growth that prioritizes sustainability, equity, and the long-term health of humans and the rock that we inhabit. While it may have potential disadvantages, degrowth does offer a way to address some of the negative consequences of unlimited economic growth and may be an important part to the solution of the global environmental and societal challenges that we face today. I first discovered degrowth when I stumbled across this super cool YouTube channel that was talking about solar punk solutions, anarchy, and the power of imagination and revolution. The guy's name was Andrewism, and
hey, what you need?
The fuck? How did you get into my TV? And how do you know who I am?
Well, you know the state's always listening, and let's just say I am too. Also, your Alexa called me.
Pesos. Well, since I got you here, you down to talk some more about degrowth?
Yeah, sure, why not? I'm just a dashing, disembodied doodle stuck here in your TV, so yeah, let's talk.
Wait. Has my Alexa called you before?
Yeah, she has, many times by accident, and it's kind of weird to call my name out then, by the way. You're kind of nah.
How did you end up finding or coming to learn about the degrowth movement?
So I was really part of the climate movement, the broader climate movement, for a few years. I was part of the Fridays for Future thing that was happening in 2019, and I'd been a part of various beach cleanups and other organizations before then. I've been learning about climate change and the existential crises that it causes for quite a while now. But I first heard the term degrowth online during my journey into anarchism and exploring anarchism. I ended up reading through the Degrowth website. I mean, and this is kind of what gets me about, you know, how some people respond to degrowth. When I first heard the term, I looked it up. Crazy, I know.
A concept.
What a concept. You hear about something new and you Google it without jumping to assumptions. I looked it up, read through the Degrowth website. I ended up picking up Less is More by Hickel, and it took a while for me to get around to reading it, but I eventually read it. And I mean, even the website alone was very helpful in explaining what it was. In fact, if people read at least the introductory stuff, they would understand that a lot of the initial critiques people have aren't really applicable. I mean, there's a couple types of framing that I disagree with in that particular book, and that some degrowth advocates advocate. But considering everything that I know about the direness of our present situation, and of course my existing anarchic politics, the need to reintegrate with the community to redevelop a reciprocal gift economy with land, and it didn't take much for me to embrace many of the ideas the degrowth movement advocates and advances.
Can we talk about some of the ways that the power of imagination can aid us in revolution? I know you've done a video about that already.
I'm glad you appreciated that video that much. I think it's one of the more important videos that I've put a lot of work and stuff into. I really think, as somebody who was had a sort of a different childhood from a lot of people, because I was homeschooled and I was able to self-direct many aspects of my learning. Imagination, and also just as a creative, as an artist and stuff, imagination is something that has driven me throughout my life. I have fond memories of many of the things that I created growing up. And so with that in mind, I think that just as I formulated these imaginary worlds in my youth, we need to continue to formulate those sort of imaginary worlds, but furthermore, aspire, use that imagination to fuel our politics. It's important to our health, to our personal development, to our development of our wisdom and our understanding and our learning, and to an appreciation of the natural world. When it comes to the imagination's role in revolution, it plays a key role in every aspect of that process of social revolution. When we confront the powers that be, we need to be able to challenge them in ways that are direct, in ways that are effective, in ways that refuse their constrictions on our capacity to express ourselves politically through the established channels, throughout the acts of non-cooperation that we may pursue, the various strikes and boycotts that we may carry out over the process of revolution. It's necessary that we're able to think of ways we can sustain ourselves, and not just sustain ourselves, but use those acts of non-cooperation to build that foundation for a new world, to not let our acts of resistance restrict us to that which is, but to push us to that which can be. And that's where most vitally imagination plays a role in prefigurative politics, in the process of prefiguration, as we sow the seeds of a future world in the here and now, as we develop the structures necessary for that world, the political structures and institutions that will develop our powers, our drives, and our capacities, and our consciousness. We need imagination to formulate that world that we are aspiring towards in the first place. We need our imagination in order to shape the world that we exist in now, and to mold it into something that we would like it to be. Politics is serious business, but I don't think that means that you can't have fun.
what are some ways you like to personally practice degrowth or solar punk values?
I, of course, promote solar punk values through my YouTube channel. But beyond my YouTube channel, one of the best ways that I'm able to promote with the skills and the knowledge and the abilities that I have is through art, particularly poetry, and the various works that I've been working on and writing to disseminate across the population, locally, regionally, and internationally. And also just interpersonally, through the course of conversation, through the practice of the Socratic method, and through the practice of just sort of agitating for deeper thought and deeper reflection in terms of how we structure our political and our economic system, how we relate with our environment, and how that needs to change, how the idea of the environment as separate from us is something that needs to change. And though I'm extremely inexperienced, I would like to say that my pursuit of solar punk and my pursuit of degrowth is something that I try to practice through the pursuit of food autonomy and sustainable food autonomy. I'm very much in the early stages of the development of my permaculture garden, but it's something that I'm hoping to develop and really proliferate over the course of this year.
This has been such a great discussion. Like, your responses have given me a lot of food for thought, and I hope other people are able to sort of run with them as well. And finally, before I let you go back to wherever you go when I'm not watching the TV, do you have any last words of advice for people that want to get into degrowth or want to start using their imagination to change their material conditions?
Yeah, I think my biggest word of advice, and this applies to YouTubers like yourself and also to just people in general who engage in the internet in any capacity, don't let these algorithms drag you down. Like, really try and be conscious of the ways that you're being influenced by what, these ineffable artificial intelligences are serving up to you on a platter every day. Be cognizant of what you're consuming in terms of the news you're getting, your various feeds, because, even prior to the internet, of course, everyone has had like a slightly different perception of reality, but with the internet and with the fact that everybody's algorithm is just slightly tweaked, slightly different, more than ever, it feels like we are being funneled into different versions of reality. Try and be aware of that. Be aware that the version of the world that you're getting is not necessarily the totality of all that there is. Don't let the news and stuff that you're getting necessarily discourage you. And I think the best salve to that kind of discouragement, the best cure, or rather prevention, is to be embedded in connection with others, working towards a project or goal that can contribute towards the cause. I don't think any of us can individually change the world, but we can change our homes, our communities, our friend groups, our schools, our workplaces, our regions even, with enough effort, with enough collective, collaborative effort.
Imagination is a skill you have to exercise. Hope is not for the faint of heart nor quick to falter. You can see it in the cowards that choose despair instead. In accounting, there's this concept called going concern, and I've always been strangely attached to it. It's the assumption that a company has the resources needed to continue operating indefinitely, or at least a predetermined time after an auditor has checked their books. It seems like this really obvious thing to check off the box for, but it's essential to the basis on which an accountant or an auditor does her work, because ultimately it's a statement of faith.
Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication.
It's false. It's a fiction. She don't know that. Basically, I'm saying going concern is the glue that transforms a fan fiction into a corporate financial statement. We believe this business will not go bankrupt in a year or 3 years or indefinitely, and because it will be there then, we have a vested interest in attending to it now. I acknowledge your continued existence, and because of that, I now have to take care of you, which is similar to what my parents said when they took me home from the hospital. And listen, they could be wrong. But that's not the point of the exercise. Humanity's greatest public works, pyramids and skyscrapers, things we erected as a reminder of how close we can rub shoulders with God, I believe that they were created with a going concern towards humanity. That they imagined someone would still be home after their own light went out and said, when they find me, I like to leave them a gift. Something that leaves the walls warmer than when I arrived. And that instinct is the driving force of humanity. Not greed, not capitalism, not the marketplace of ideas. No, it's the thought. The thought that things can change for the better. The thought that we, these silly and stressful selections of star shit, are worth attending to. Worth thinking about. I mean, that's the thing. For all my irony and Gen Z detachment, I still care. I still like to believe that humanity, that I, am a going concern. So as always, be kind.